Margaret, you doing laundry is being recorded.
No, that's okay. I'm done. Why, girl? It's a good thing. See, even doing laundry, people sign into your class.
Yeah, it really is. It's amazing. It's wonderful, really. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to start in 1 minute. Let me just make sure everyone's muted. Mute. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm so excited to be here. It's been too long since the last semester. We have a really exciting summer ahead. The classes, a lot of times they're random and don't have a common thread running through. But this this summer, a lot of them are going to be connected. So the more you tune in, the bigger picture you'll get. Tisha B'Av is coming up. I'm not doing anything on the Beit HaMikdash or on the Romans. I'm doing something more on modern history, but I think it's also appropriate as Tisha B'Av is coming up because it does deal with a painful time in Jewish history. So let me share my screen with you and we can start. And thank you for spending one of your mornings in the summer to learn about Eress Yisrael and connect. I think it's always amazing. Okay. I want to speak today about somebody who is not famous. She doesn't have a plaque. Her name is not on any walls. Let me just admit somebody in. Okay. Hi, Ellen. Welcome. I'm just going to repeat that sentence. I want to speak today about someone who is not famous, doesn't have a plaque on anything. If you search her on the internet, you're not going to find her name. But for me, this person is an example of bravery and courage and the strength of the human spirit and how much we could overcome. And this person that I want to is going to be part of the story today. She is a mom, and she's a mom of a 7-year-old girl. And she's a mom of a 7-year-old girl and 4 other children during the War of Independence, and she's living in the Old City. Now, I think any parent living in the Old City during the War of Independence with little children is really a hero, because when we're going to learn today, it's going to be a personal account, a story of a specific family, and it's just unbelievable what parents at all times of life, any time period, have a lot of challenges to deal with, and I think they're even more compounded when there is war going on and some of the conditions that the Jews lived in. So I want to tell the story of this mom and her family, because after learning about her, I said in my book, she is a superstar. What we are going to discuss today is, one, we're going to explore daily life in the Rova. The Rova is the Jewish quarter of the Old City in 1947, 1948. Now, I gave a Zoom, which you could find on YouTube, on this topic, but which you invited to see. The difference is now it's going to be a personal story, not just general facts. So if you were there before, this will enhance it. If not, it's totally fine. Other questions I would like to explore: what was the experience of being kicked out of the Rova, and where did the Jews go after the Rova fell? And another question I want to keep in mind is, what are some of the more painful parts of our history as a Jewish nation? We all love talking about the 6-Day War and all of the great things that happened to us as Jewish people, but it's also to remember the not so great things, because it builds who we are as a nation and our character. Everything you're going to hear today is based off of a book called Mitocha Hafecha by Pua Steiner. Pua Steiner is a 7-year-old girl that she's writing from her vantage point. It's amazing how many facts she remembers being only 7. And we're going to be talking about her family. They have this book. I think you'll be convinced to read it by the end of it. It is, I could not put it down. They have the book in English. It's called Forever My Jerusalem, if any of you have ever read it. If not, I highly, highly, highly recommend. It's really an incredible book. So, some background. In 1917, the British, they gained control over Israel, and 1,000 years of Muslim rule comes to an end. And when the Jews see that the British are going to rule, they're so excited, they're so happy, and they say, finally, we're going to get a Jewish national home. It was really a great time for the Jewish people, this change in leadership. And another interesting thing, it's the first time that Jerusalem wasn't conquered. Usually it's conquered by war. Now it was treated with reverence and respect. How so? So there was proclamations that came out, and this proclamation, for example, says that we as British people need to respect the holy sites and we can't destroy them. And it is really very unique because Israel was not used to having people deal respectfully with its sites. And that's what the British decided that they would do. They would respect the city's past and traditions. So the Jews are thrilled, but as time went on, they became less thrilled. Why? Because while the British are very happy that a homeland is going to be established, that the British came, no Muslim rule, the Arabs feel threatened. And when the Arabs feel threatened, there's chaos, and they riot, and they murder, and they loot. And that's what was going on. But the British are in charge, so the British need to react to that. And what is the British reaction? So they're supposed to be neutral, maintain the peace, but they often caved into Arab pressure. And things got worse and worse and worse for the Jews as time went on. And this is where our story begins, exactly at this point in history. And we are going to follow the lives of the Shriner family who live in the Old City. What was it like living in the Old City at that time? So most families lived in one room, and they didn't expect more because that's what they had. That was great for them. The furniture, a table, a few chairs, a closet, some beds, and they were lucky if they had a bed frame. Sometimes it was just mattresses that they'd pile up on top of each other. There was no running water, there was no electricity. So Pua, she's the girl that's telling the stories. She says that in her room, in her house, they had this big clock on top of the closet, and this was her parents' wedding gift. And just to have that sink in, that's what her parents got when they got married, a clock. So that was their gift, and the mother had candlesticks that she'd keep in the closet. This was also another prized possession. Her father's Sifriya, Hebrew books they would have. If they needed to go to the bathroom, so they would go outside in the courtyard, or if it was at night, they'd go in a pail and then dump it out. If they needed water, there was a pit of water outside, and an Arab guy would come every day and we'd get water out, and everyone would stand in line and they'd get water. And that was their life. And something really nice that Pua writes in her book, she says, in those days, those are the living conditions of most of the people that we know. And she says people were no less happy then than they are now. This was what they had, and they were happy. So that when I was reading her writing that line, it leads me to question of how much more we have today, and are we happier now? Are we less happy? So I think it shows that you don't need the stuff to make the happiness. Some stories she shares with us about living life then. Praying by the Kotel. So the Kotel today, if you go to the plaza, it's huge. There's tons of space. It's enjoyable. You can get a chair. You could sit in the shade. Really a nice experience. You could get books. You could sit as long as you want. You could sit there all day if you want. But back then, when the British were in charge, if the Jews would go and pray, they would have to stand up in the entire tefillah. And tefillah could be really long. Think about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, not sitting even for a minute. And if they brought a little stool or a chair, the British would take it away right away because they're disrupting the order, and the British need to maintain order. And sitting down on a chair was considered disrupting order. Rosh Hashanah, no shofar blowing, that disrupts the order. What were other things that were going on? So Pua writes, we could be saying Tehillim, and then all of a sudden we have to move back quickly because there's dirty water being rained on our heads, and if we don't move, our shoes are going to get soggy and dirty. Why is it dirty water being rained on their heads? Because the Arabs that live in houses above the Kotel decide, oh, now would be a wonderful time to take our broom made of straw and clean the house and let the dirty water fall on the Jews that's praying. But that's not considered disturbing the order. That was okay. That was allowed. Other things, Arabs sometimes would decide, hey, let me ride through on my horse or my donkey, and then the Jews would have to press themselves against the already narrow alleyway against the wall so they wouldn't get crushed. Not disturbing the order. That's okay. That's allowed. So that's what it was like to pray at the Kotel, a huge difference from what it is today. And here you can see a picture of it, how narrow it is. These, what you see here, are houses and all Muslims that live there, and this is a little narrow alleyway. And here is a British soldier standing guard. Here's a Jew praying. Also, there was no mechitza at that time. The Jews wanted to put one up, but that was disturbing the order. So there was no mechitza. What else was it like living there? So there's a shul. If I don't know if you recognize it, ever built into it. It's called the Churva, which is ironic because Churva, Charev means destroyed, but the shul is not destroyed. The name has to do with its significant, with its story of it was destroyed many times, but it was around in 1948, and the Jews would go and pray there. And Pua writes, I would go with my dad, and we would pray, and we'd be able to sit, and we had no British people and no Arab people disturbing our prayers. And I looked at the sky and I would see these stars, and I didn't know if it was the actual ceiling. I didn't know if it was the real sky. And it was just such a moment that I loved. And there was nothing better than going and hearing the tefillot there. And she actually asked her dad one night, she goes, Dad, when the third Beit HaMikdash is built, is it going to be as pretty as the Churva? Which gives us an understanding as to how pretty the Churva was. And here's what it looks like today. Really fascinating. And it's great view also. You see Had Habayit in the background over here. The Arab Shuk, when the Jews wanted vegetables back then, they would go to the Arab Shuk and buy. And there was tons of produce, and it was an exciting, fun place to be. Pua goes one day with her mother, and her mother tells her, we're going to pick out tomatoes. They can't be too hard, they can't be too soft, they can't be too red, they can't be too green. And the Arab sellers would be friendly and smile at them, and the mom would get everything that she needed. And Pua describes it as a really positive, nice experience. People were friends with each other. Keep that in mind. Their field. So this is called Kad Batema Chased in the old city today. Didn't look like this then, but it was the same area. And she's 7 years old, and she's going out, and the kids are playing with each other. And anyone that lived at that time said, we did not have money for games. If you wanted to play, we take apricot pits, we take stones. They were very creative, had a ton of time. Kids are super creative. And other than the normal games of kids, what else would they talk about? So she said, we would talk about the politics of the day. There's 7, first grade, second grade, maybe. Which side are you on? Are you on the side of the Haganah, or are you on the side of the Etzel? Now, to explain in one sentence what that is, before we have the IDF, we had underground organizations. One was called the Haganah. Haganah means defense. They took a more defensive role. They said, we need to defend. We can't be on the offensive. And some people said, that's not good enough. We can't just defend. We need to be proactive. And that was the Etzel. And you have these kids in the field discussing which side should we be on. And it's really incredible how the news of the country, it got down into lives of the little kids. I always think today, imagine, I mean, maybe they do discuss it. I don't know. 6 or 7-year-olds today in recess discussing this, discussing politics, discussing the future of the nation of Israel. I think that's pretty incredible. And Bua said she didn't know which side to be on. So she goes home one night and she can't sleep. And she goes, Dad, what side should we be on, the Haganah or Etzel? And he looks at her like, you're 7 years old. This is what you're asking me? And he convinces her to be on one side. And then another day she's convinced to be on another side. And that was just part of her daily life, discussing what is going on in the country of Israel. Whose side do we want to be on? More defensive or more offensive? Pua writes one day, she's with her dad. Now, to explain the city of Jerusalem, you have people living in the old city and you have people living in the new city. From 1860, people started living in the walls, and we're in 1948 now. So there were tons of communities developed. And slowly, people chose to move to the new city because it was more developed, there was more going on, easier access to things. And she would go with her dad. Now, the Jews at that time, they had to carry their identity cards around always. I actually think that's still the rule in Israel, that you need to have, it's called your Tawdat Zehut, with you at all times. I don't really know anyone that does. I don't carry mine around. I carry my license to have some form of ID. And your Tawdat Zehut number today, and especially then, but even today, you need it for everything. If you go and you buy gas in the gas station, they ask you for your Tawdat Zehut number. I remember I was buying a microwave once, they asked me for my Tawdat Zehut number. You need it for everything. People like equating it to a social security number, but you don't need your social security number for everything, and you need this for everything. Anyway, she's with her dad, and she's with her dad, and the British decide, let's do a check and make sure everyone has their identification card. So they ask her father to that's a hoot. Now her father is German and he's very orderly and organized and he carries it around everywhere. So he shows the ID. Now the father's cousin Benjamin was not as lucky and he doesn't have his ID on him. So what happens? The British take him and you're gonna bring him to one of their police stations. Now, he was a citizen of the old city. He just didn't have his ID on him. But all the begging and pleading does not matter. And they approach the British officer who's smoking a pipe, very relaxed, and they say, where are you taking him? I don't know. And this is what the reality the Jews are living in. I don't know, somewhere. And then Pua's father goes very quickly back to the old city, gets his ID card, Benjamin's ID card, eventually finds out where Benjamin is taken and helps him get free. And this was a routine thing. The reason why this specific check was done was because something we're going to talk about in later Zooms this summer, which is, I love this topic, is ships that came illegally to what was then Palestine, Israel, with refugees from the Holocaust. And the night before, a lot of refugees came and they managed to escape. So the British want to check to make sure none of them are refugees. So that was a routine happening. This story, Pua writes that she was given 5 mil, which was the money at the time, by her dad's friend. Now, that money was a ton. This picture and this story, it reminds me of, well, my scarf is falling off. It reminds me of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, because you know how he finds extra money on the street and he gets so excited and he buys the chocolate bar. So Pua goes with her sister that day into the chocolate store. Usually all they could do is look at the windows, but now she has enough money to buy. And they buy a few things and she buys this chocolate bar with nuts in it. And Pua's sister, her name is Naomi, she shares with all the girls that they were okay. I'm gonna pause for 1 second. I just need to I'll be right back. My scarf is falling off. Hold on, I'll be right back. I just need to fix it. Okay. I did one that's less likely gonna fall. I bet you never had class pause for that reason. So anyway, she goes into the store and they come out of the store and her sister immediately, very nice sharer, is giving little pieces of chocolate to everyone. And Pua doesn't want to share her chocolate. How often does she get to buy? So she says, no, I'm saving it for Shabbat. Okay, it's a legitimate excuse. Anyway, she gets home and she puts it in this closet. She hides it. She says, I'm saving it for Shabbat. Next day, as the kids are getting home from school, they walk in and they see their mom is frantic. Searches. That's what the mom is saying. The mom runs to the closet. She opens it up. She takes out her diamond ring that her husband gave her when she got married. She's looking for anything of value. And Pua's asking her, what are you doing? She doesn't understand what's going on. All of a sudden, 2 British soldiers walk in and they turn everything upside down, opening closets, moving beds, moving bookcases. And Pua is standing there in the room, hugging her sister Naomi with fright, doesn't understand what's going on. What do they find? They pull out this wad of cash that they see. Chocolate bars in a second. And what's this wad of cash? It was the dad's salary for a month. They just helped themselves to it. Now, they're not supposed to be doing such a thing because they're members of the British Army. They're not supposed to be stealing and putting things into their pocket. But that is what they do. And then, I hate this part, they find her chocolate bar. And what does the hungry British soldier do? Immediately, he takes the chocolate bar, rips it open, sticks it in his mouth. This part reminds me of if you've seen Matilda, when the Trunchbull, she like sticks the chocolate in her mouth. Anyway, and Pua is watching there in horror as her beloved chocolate bar that she's saving and didn't want to share with anyone is being eaten by this British soldier. And she screams out, she says, hey, that's my chocolate. And the soldier says, "Oh, is yours? Here." And he holds out his hand. And when she holds out her hand to take it back, he stuffs the rest in his mouth. And she's horrified. And after they leave, she goes, "Mommy, why do you save my chocolate?" 7-year-old girl, the mother is beside herself that the salary is gone, all these things, and she's worried about her chocolate. And this was the life of one story, but this was the life of the Jewish people living in the old city then. Could you imagine what it is? And one of the reasons why I love learning this history is because no matter how challenging things could be in the Israeli government, anything is better than being ruled by the British. We are ruling ourselves, not having the British rule us. So this is what people went through. 1947, November 30th, we have the Partition Plan. The Jews are divided on the issue. Some like it, and because they said at least we're going to have some kind of state. And others say, no, what do you mean? We can't give them this much land. And here the yellow is the Arab state and the orange is for Jewish state. The Arabs are actually united in their reaction, that they all give a big no, why are we partitioning? And how do they react? So a lot of people learn, I used to think this, that the War of Independence starts the day after Ben Gurion declares a state. It actually starts the day after the UN says we're going to give you a state. But I think the reason why people declare it later on after Ben Gurion declares a state is because that's when the Muslim countries surrounding joined the war. Before, it was just the local Arabs. But it really is the start of the War of Independence, the unofficial start. So this is the vote with everyone sitting by the radio, dancing the street. But that is when the fighting began. And what is life like now? And this is before the official start of the war, and it's still horrible. So you have riots in the old city. So the Pua's dad takes her and her sister and says, you guys need to stay with your grandparents in the new city. You can't come back to the old city because you're not going to be able to go to school if you go back and forth. And that's what they do. And they don't see their parents for months. They're little kids, 7 and 9, for 4 months not seeing their parents, and they're not living a great life. They're scared. They're hearing shooting, and they can't go and hug their mom. They had even younger siblings, 2 babies at home. That imagine when you're away for a baby for a week, they grow up so much. Imagine in 4 months how much they grow. Pua has one dress, and she says, my dress was dirty and stained, but I had nothing else to change into. She has no clothes. And she goes to bed to a nightly shooting from Sheikh Jarrah, which was the local Arab neighborhood. What her grandma, she writes, would put sandbags in the windows. So hopefully if their house gets shot, it would hold it back. And this is the reality that they're living in. When supplies needed to be brought to Jerusalem, they would come. This over here is a line of convoys, these armored vehicles, because it was very dangerous to come. But if the cities outside of Jerusalem didn't take care of them, then they had no way to get food and medicine and supplies. Hua writes very painfully in her book, 4 months have passed and I still haven't been home. And I just turned 7. And she's very sad because she remembers the year before that she had this fantastic birthday, and her sister did remember her birthday, but that was about it. So she was 6, and the entire time up until now, she was 6 years old. After 4 months, her dad comes one day and says, that's it, we're going home. Mom and I decided we need you home. And Pua writes about what it's like to be in a convoy. And she says she gets into this vehicle. It's stuffy, it's small, it's hot. She can't really breathe. And they're driving along. And then she says, my grandma says Tefilat HaDerech, which calmed me. The grandma was also there. The grandma was living nearby in the old city. And she came to bring the girls back. And then as they're driving, the driver says, okay, everybody get down. They get down, shooting. Okay, we could continue. Can you imagine something like that? So that one event to happen is scary enough. And this is a usual occurrence. So she finally gets to the old city. And that night she goes, well, Ma, dinner is so good. Why is dinner so great? When we were in grandma's house, we had bread and water and not much all the time. So her mother, she gives it's a sad answer. She said, the country or the old city, they don't want us to leave the old city anymore. So they decide that they're going to give the best supplies to the residents in the old city, so we stay. So that was why dinner was so good. However, as things got worse and worse, there was almost no dinner. Now, what's her new life like? So we said beforehand, well, let me read this through and then we'll compare it. So the Arab guy that used to come every day and give them water from the pit of water, he's no more, because now they're not friends anymore, the Arabs and the Jews. Going to the Arab Shuk, which Pua describes as a really fun experience, no more, because the looks that they're getting from the Arabs. And she writes, I couldn't understand how one day we're friends and one day we're not. Khurva, no more praying there. Kotel, no more kotel visits. And life as she knew it had completely, from one simple act of saying we're going to give a state to the Jewish people, changed it all completely. Here, this picture is mind-boggling to me. You see people that are in Jerusalem and look how they're walking. They're walking crouched down because they're afraid of getting shot at. And that was the reality. You had to be scared when you went outside. Now, here's the big question. Do you stay or do you leave the Rava? Now, on the one hand, it's bad everywhere. They know that the British are going to leave. They know there's going to be a war. And no matter where you go, it's not safe. So you might as well stay. And you might as well stay because the old city is your home. It's Kodesh. It's close to Harabayit. How could you leave? You need to protect it. But on the other hand, even though there's fighting everywhere, the fighting is a lot worse in the old city. And as a mom or as a dad, when you have children that you need to protect, that's what you need to take into account. Their safety, because their safety would probably trump the national aspirations and ideals. You want them to be alive, you want your family to be alive, so maybe you should go. And this is now the big question facing the Jews. Pua writes that one day she's with her sister in the field and she sees this family going with these huge winter coats and bundles. And she sees one of the people in the family, a little girl, and she calls out to her. She says, hey, and the girl doesn't answer and they walk quickly. And she has no idea where they're going. 5 more families looking exactly like that go to. And she realizes they are leaving the Rava and they're very embarrassed about it. So they're not going to say bye. Now, what about Pua's family? Now, Pua's dad was very involved in the Jewish community. He was a teacher and he was also always helped the community. And they believed a lot in Am Yisrael and in hopefully what would be the state of Israel. But then her mom says one day to her dad, that's it, we're leaving, I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore, it's too dangerous, I need my family to be safe. And the dad is horrified to hear this because he knows that every family that leaves weakens the Rava. And Pua gets out of her bed with her sister and they say, we're not leaving the battlefield. And the mother looks at her, battlefield, where do you even get these terms from? And they say, we're not going to be like everyone that leaves and shirks their responsibility. And these conversations took place in the courtyard during recess. And then the dad, I love that the dad said this because it shows what kind of relationship he had with his wife. He goes, girls, mothers have a sixth sense. If mommy thinks that we should leave, then we're leaving because we're doing what she says. And then the girls ask, whose side are you on, the Haganah or the Etzel? And the mother says, I'm not on either side. I'm on the side of a mom that wants to protect her family. And with a heavy heart, Pua's family decides that they're going to leave the Rava while they still can. And they pack up everything, also in bundles, winter coats. And the next morning, they go to wait for a convoy to take them out. That was the only way out. And you see from the title, the convoy that didn't arrive. Now, at 8 a.m, someone comes and knocks on their door before they go and wait outside. And he sees that everything is packed and they're dressed in a certain way. And he goes, where are you going? And the dad turns beet red and says, we're leaving the old city. They go, you too? You're also leaving the old city? We need you to come to an important meeting. So he tells his family, let me go to the meeting and then I'll come back. And the guy that knocked on the door said the convoy is going to be late. Anyway, the dad ends up joining them. They're waiting. The convoy does not end up coming. There was a decision made by the people in the old city that nobody is allowed to leave the old city anymore because they needed all the strength they could get. Now, on the one hand, the little kids are not really fighting the war and maybe they're going to get in the way. But on the other hand, actually reading these accounts and following the history of what happened, the little kids were a huge part of the war. They helped. They would run from post to post. They were small. They knew the way in the old city. It was completely a team effort. Everybody helped try to protect the old city. And after Ben Gurion declares independence, they are so excited because the British are finally leaving. And this is what they wanted. No more searches, no more British people that say they're going to help and then they take the sides of the Arabs. They're leaving. We're free of them. We could rule ourselves. And this is the official beginning of the War of Independence, because now it's not only local Arabs fighting, it's organized armies that are coming and joining. Pua is with her family in the house. And all of a sudden, now at this point, they weren't even in the house. There was a lot of families all grouped together to try to be in a safer area from the shooting. All of a sudden, there's this mob of Jews running down the street. And they say, there's an attack on Rehova Yehudim, which you could actually walk in still today in the old city. This is a good story to tell there. They have knives, they're going crazy. And how do the Jews react inside? They don't react calmly. There's no one to keep the order. They go crazy and they quick, everyone get up, let's go, let's start running. And they start running. And then they realize, where are we running to? On the one hand, we're running away from these Arabs with knives on Rehova Yehudim. And on the other hand, we're running straight towards the shooting from Har Zatim, from the Mount of Olives, which is across the hill. So we have nowhere to run to. And Pua writes, this is worse than Yam Suf. At least in Yam Suf opened for them. They had the Egyptians on one hand, Yam Suf on the other. But then God did a miracle. She goes, where's our miracle? Where's our opening of the Yam Suf? And the miracle didn't come. And then they ended up, because they realized they have nowhere to go, they went back to the house. And her dad calls and they're all crying, and the Jews were literally saying vidui, because they believe they were all going to die. And this is what you say before you die, say confession of your sins. And people are crying, and the grandma goes, here, at least say Tehillim, do something productive. And her dad calls her and her sister aside and says, girls, I don't know what's going to happen. God does protect the Jewish people. Maybe he'll protect us right now. Maybe he won't. Maybe you'll be alive. Maybe you won't. I don't know. But I want to tell you something that you should always remember for your whole lives. Now, the mom sees that the father is giving over his last words to her girls, and she goes crazy. No, stop. Why are you talking like that? And he says, girls, if I'm not here to continue, I want you to always remember that the most important thing in life is the Torah. And that's what we always need to choose. And when you get married, if on one hand you have a rich, successful guy, or on the other hand you have the Torah, what are you going to choose? And they scream the Torah, the Torah, the Torah. Always remember that. Teach your younger siblings that this is what I said and this is what's important to me. And what a message, what a parting message. It reminds me of what David HaMelech tells his son Shlomo before he's going to die, about how important it is to read the Torah. Or if we even open up in Sefer Devarim, Moshe's parting words, he talks about following the Torah, and this is what the father said as well. And then walks in a man dressed in khaki who is a Jewish soldier. And at that point, there were no underground movements anymore. They were allowed to proudly be Jewish soldiers and walk with weapons in public. There were no searches for weapons like we saw the British searching before. And he says, everything's under control. No one's going anywhere. Everyone just be calm. And then he leaves. Pua's family, they go to a different location. They go to a storage room. They're basically in a dark area, and they're still shooting. They constantly hear. Everyone's just waiting for hope, waiting for salvation, waiting for more soldiers to come and back up the old city. And it's not coming. Just for you to get a sense of what the conditions were. So if you see this blue line, this is how much area the Jews had before. And now this red is where they're all smushed into. So the more the Arabs fought them, the smaller and smaller and smaller things got. And eventually the fighting powers in the old city, the Jews, they decide we need to surrender because we can't make it like this. We're not getting help from the rest of the nation. If we want to stay alive, we need to surrender. And Pua writes, we surrender. And we get out of the storage area we were in, and the sun blinded us after not stepping outside for weeks. And then the Jewish soldiers, they're throwing all their weapons down into the water pit. And she's horrified. How could you throw your weapons into the pit? This is what you worked so hard to get. How are you throwing them away? And the mother explains, because we're surrendering and we don't want the Arabs to get them, so better we'll destroy them. And they need to leave. And there's people, especially older ones, who have never left the old city in their entire lives. They have 1 hour, forgot the age. We have 1 hour to pack all our stuff and leave. Shabbat is in a few hours. What now? And the continuation, we are going to see next week what happens when they're leaving. It's a story. Originally, I said, oh, I'll do all this in one class. And it's a huge story in itself, just to them to get out of the old city. And then what happens? Where do they go after? So that we're going to discuss next week, the continuation of Puah's story. Just want to summarize what we spoke about today. We opened with a woman who deserves a plaque. Her real heroic efforts you're going to see in next week's class. We discussed daily life in the Nova. They lived in one room. They would go to the Arab Shuk, British occupation, how at first it was great for the Jews, then it ended up not being good, their living conditions, praying by the Kotel, how the Jews couldn't disturb the peace, even though Arabs disturb the peace all the time, the discussions in the field of the 6 and 7-year-olds, which side are you on, how are we going to help the Jewish state, the searches, the checks for Teudat Zehu, for identification card, the British coming and searching for weapons and taking whatever they fancy, the Partition Plan of the United Nations, which started the fighting, the constant shooting, the only safe way to get to Jerusalem being via convoys, and their new life that they had to get used to. No longer did they have the life of the past where they were friends with the Arabs that were there. The huge question that every family faced: do we stay in the old city or do we leave the old city? The British finally leave. Everyone's thrilled, but this means the war is really beginning. They think that it's over. Their father gives them his will, and then they surrender. What happens after they surrender? That we are going to discuss next week. So these 3 questions are all for next week. And the additional question we asked ourselves was, what are some of the more painful parts of our history as a Jewish nation? Now, I think this is really unique because we told a personal story of someone living there and what it was like for her. And it's very painful, and it's important to know, one, because we totally appreciate even more what our lives are. And it's part of who we are. It's not all victory. It's not all great. And it's important to know all of it. Thank you so much for joining. It was really great to be here, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Adele.
You're welcome.
That was great.
Bye.